And please mute yourselves. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you who've joined us from more than a dozen countries in different parts of the world. My name is Carrie McLean, and I'm a member of the steering committee that organized the International Commission of Inquiry on Systemic Racist Police Violence Against People of African Descent in the United States. I'm honored to welcome you all to the opening of the hearings for the Commission of Inquiry. It is particularly significant to open these hearings on the day that the United States commemorates the birthday, life, and legacy of civil rights legend, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In 1963, Dr. King said, "We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality." Almost 60 years later, we're still facing and fighting those horrors. A project such as the Commission of Inquiry is one contribution to the struggle against police violence, a struggle which includes the organizing that we're doing in our communities, the demonstrations in the streets, and much more. And the struggle against police violence is one key element in their overall struggle for Black liberation. In June 2020, an international coalition of hundreds of organizations and individuals sent a communication to the United Nations Human Rights Council urging that the UN convene a commission of inquiry to investigate racism and racist police violence in the United States. That communication was sent to the UN due to the excellent organizing done by the US Human Rights Network and the ACLU Human Rights Program, and with the support of grassroots organizations such as Mothers Against Police Brutality and other individuals. The UN declined the request to convene a commission of inquiry, though it did task the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights with preparing a report on racism.
Oh, that's it. That's fine. That's fine. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Following the UN's decision to not convene a commission of inquiry, the National Conference of Black Lawyers, the National Lawyers Guild, and the International Association of Democratic Lawyers decided to convene a commission of inquiry to conduct the thorough and impartial investigation of police violence in the US that the community had demanded. The Commission of Inquiry will investigate the systemic, widespread, and grave violations of the rights of Black people by law enforcement in the US and present its findings in a report. The report will be shared with the UN High Commissioner and shared with the public. The work of the Commission of Inquiry does not exist to supplant the work of the UN. The UN still bears a responsibility to sufficiently address racism and police violence in the US. Rather, the International Commission of Inquiry on Systemic Racist Police Violence Against People of African Descent in the United States hopes that its investigations and reports will complement and support the work of the High Commissioner. The Commission of Inquiry will conduct a thorough investigation into anti-Black violence perpetrated by police in the US, both historically and in recent times, with an emphasis on evaluating the most recent cases and addressing the connection of the current cases to the history of systemic racism. The Commission will make recommendations, in particular on accountability measures with a view to ending impunity and ensuring legal accountability for violations and abuses, and to protecting people against further abuses. And the Commission will present a report to the UN High Commissioner, other relevant international bodies, and to the general public by April of 2021. We've assembled a team of 12 experts, none of whom are from the United States, to conduct the investigations in an independent and impartial manner. Finally, I'll take a quick moment to introduce the other members of the steering committee, as well as the rapporteur and commissioners for today's hearings. You can read everyone's bios and get other information about the Commission of Inquiry on our website, www.inquirycommission.org. First, the chair of our steering committee, Lennox Hines. Next, steering committee member Nana Gyamfi, who is the president of the National Conference of Black Lawyers. Jeannie Myrer, who is the president of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers. Pusha Gehi, former executive director of the National Lawyers Guild. Ann Else, Beth Lyons, Emil McDowell, Claire Gilchrist, and Richard Harvey. Our rapporteur for today is Ria Julien. And last but not least, the two commissioners who will preside over today's hearings are Mr. Max Boqwana of South Africa and Judge Peter Herbert of the United Kingdom. Thank you all. I'll now give the floor to today's rapporteur, Ria Julien.
Good morning, and thank you for being here. We now begin in the case of Eric Garner. As you heard, my name is Ria Julien, and I am the rapporteur for this hearing. And the commissioners you've heard are Max Boqwana of South Africa and Peter Herbert of Kenya. The witnesses for this hearing this morning, the witness is attorney for Mr. Garner, Jonathan Moore, a partner at Beldock, Levine and Hoffman. And just by way of housekeeping, there will be 50 minutes for this hearing. Witnesses will testify, followed by a period of questions from commissioners. I will call time at the 30-minute mark and the 45-minute mark. I understand there's also going to be a video played today, and please do excuse my interruptions. Commissioners Boqwana and Herbert, I now present you the first witness, Attorney Jonathan Moore. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ria, and welcome, Peter. We can proceed.
Welcome, everybody.
Jonathan?
Yes, you want me to proceed?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me to give testimony here today. My name is Jonathan Moore. I'm a civil rights attorney.
Please proceed.
Sorry. I've been practicing law for 44 years, about. A longtime member of the National Lawyers Guild, as well as the International Association of Democratic Lawyers. My practice is centered in New York. The focus of my practice over these many years has really been about police violence against people of color. I represented the estate of Eric Garner back in 2014 after he was brutally killed by New York City police officers through the use of a chokehold. That matter actually, because there was a video which demonstrated how wrongful the conduct was, we believe that the case was resolved without even having to file a complaint. And the family was paid $6.9 million for what happened. But that really only began the story. That wasn't the end of the story of what happened to Eric Garner, because the struggle has continued for many years to seek discipline against the officers who were responsible for Eric Garner's death. There was a proceeding that took 5 years against one officer, an officer Pantalone, that resulted in his dismissal from the force. That proceeding, as I said, was only against one of the officers involved, and the fact that it was only against one of the officers is very telling, because there were many officers involved. The medical examiner determined that the death of Eric Garner was a combination of neck and chest compression. In other words, there was somebody who had his arm around his neck, they were on top of him, on his back, he was face first on the ground. That could only have been accomplished by not just one, but several officers being on top of him. And if you look at the video, which I'm sure people have seen many times, you see that in fact is what happened. None of those officers were ever even brought up on disciplinary charges. The only officer who was charged was Pantalone. And that struggle continues. I know you'll hear a video from Mr. Garner's mother, Gwen Carr, who has been struggling mightily for these now almost 7 years, 6.5 years, to really hold all those responsible for her son's death accountable. What the death of Eric Garner represented was not just that was not an aberration. It was one in a long series of police killings of people of color throughout the 80s and 90s and into this current century. I first got involved in New York with police and use of deadly force on people of color in the Michael Stewart case. Many people may remember back in 1983, Michael Stewart was a young graffiti artist who was killed by African-American graffiti artist who was killed by officers who were assigned to the Transit Authority Police Department. That case began, unfortunately, a long series of cases over the years, including Abner Louima, Amadou Diallo, Sean Bell, Eric Garner. These are just one of the many cases where the police have used excessive force against people of color without justification. The question you have to ask yourself is the police department of the city of New York, do they engage in discrimination against people of color? And I would have to say to you quite unequivocally that the answer has to be yes. And I'm going to switch gears slightly because one of the other cases I was involved in over the years here in New York City was the issue around stop and frisk. And it ties to the Eric Garner case. The stop and frisk case was a class action brought by residents of the city of New York, alleging that the police engaging in street encounters with mostly people of color, engaged in racial profiling. Now, that's a claim that's often made but rarely proved. But in 2013, we actually had a 10-week trial in the federal court where we ended up with a judgment, not a settlement, but a judgment against the New York Police Department, where the court found that as a matter of policy and practice over a number of years, the police department had engaged in a policy of racial profiling. Why is that relevant to Eric Garner's case? Because the encounter with Eric Garner began as a run-of-the-mill, ordinary street encounter, a stop, possibly question and frisk that turned bad. And it illustrates the true damage, the true harm that comes from allowing a police department to allowing officers to make decisions based upon improper motivations. In fact, the police in the Eric Garner case, under the then existing law and current law in the U.S. and New York State, had no justification for stopping or searching or trying to arrest Eric Garner because there was no credible report that he engaged in a felony or a common law or a penal law misdemeanor as defined by the laws of the state of New York. So, you think, a stop and frisk, it's a short encounter on the street. It only happens, it's how intrusive could it be? Well, we see in the Eric Garner case how intrusive it could be. And then multiply that by the fact that in our period of time when we were looking at stop and frisk, which was from about 2008 to 2012, there were 4 million documented stops and frisks on the streets of New York, 90% of which were directed at people of color, and 90% of which led to no further investigative activity. In other words, in common parlance, the police were wrong 90% of the time, and were using race as the motivating factor to make stops. And that is exactly what the court found. And that is why and that explains really the context of the Eric Garner case. I'm happy to take any questions about it at this point, or I'm not sure if that's the format you want to follow, or.
I would turn it over. We still have a certain amount of time. If you'd like to continue to elaborate, we provided about half an hour.
How much more time do I have? How much more time would I have?
20 minutes if you wish.
Okay, I can take a few more minutes. One of the most difficult issues with respect to these cases and this struggle for racial equality and for to eliminate racism from police activity is how do you remedy it? Now, as I said, back in 2013, we tried a case for 10 weeks, put on evidence from the community members, put on evidence from experts, put on evidence from victims, and the court found that the police had indeed engaged in racial profiling in violation of both the Fourth, which is the Fourth and 14th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. The Fourth Amendment protecting people from illegal searches and seizures, and the 14th Amendment protecting individuals from racial discrimination. So we have now been engaged over the last, really beginning in November of 2014 up until the present, and trying to figure out how to remedy the issues of that came up in that case. And it's been very arduous. It's been like pulling teeth. And I have to say, after almost over 6 years, I'm not sure how far we've gotten, or whether we've really changed or beginning to put mechanisms in place that would change the culture of the police department. Although the number of stops have gone down over that period of time, the percentage of people being stopped is still the same in terms of the racial breakdown, which suggests that officers are still making decisions based on race more than any other factor. The complaints that have been made of racial profiling during that period, of somewhere in, I think, in the range of 3,000 complaints. There have been 0 substantiated complaints by the police department, which leads you to wonder who's doing, what kind of investigation they're doing. All of which we bring to the court's attention, periodically, and try to urge the court to do a better job. And it's very difficult to see how you can really affect this change through the courts. It's important to bring these cases. It's important to point out misconduct when it occurs. But what we've come to understand and to learn over this period of time is that the only way you're really going to change the police department in a city like New York is through community pressure, community involvement. And there are organizations in the city of New York who have worked very long and hard to try to push issues of reform within the police department with some success, in large part through the city council getting certain local laws passed that are designed to ensure more accountability of the police and what they do. And so I think that's a very important reality to acknowledge in these cases, that it's not just the lawsuit that changes things. It's really the community rising up and saying enough is enough. And they certainly, the events over the last summer with the George Floyd case have certainly demonstrated that there is a lot of anger out there in the community and the need for change, and there has been some change. But I think there's a slogan from the National Lawyers Guild I remember over the many years, that justice is a constant struggle. And as much as we continue to litigate and to advocate for significant change and policing in the city of New York, which I can speak to, we realize how much further we have to go. So, although I think litigation is an important aspect of what we do, it's in many ways it's only the start. It's only a part of the process of really trying to develop meaningful change. One of the things that came out of one of the changes that came out of our stop and frisk litigation was the police department began to use body cameras and instituted system-wide the use of body-worn cameras. There's a lot of controversy over that in terms of its effectiveness, but overall, we judge it to be a positive development. There has certainly been more scrutiny of all the processes and all the procedures and all the training and racial sensitivity training that's been introduced within the police departments. Those are all very good. On paper, the key for us has been to try to push to make sure that these reforms at the Institute are not just paper reforms, but are meaningful reforms. And that is a very difficult struggle that we face ongoing in terms of these issues. And with that, I think I'll stop.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. I believe we now have a video that is available that will be played. And this is a video by the mother of Eric Garner. We have some pre-recorded comments from Gwen Carr, who wanted to be with us today, but had other commitments this morning, during the morning of MLK Day. So we will now be viewing that video.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. It's good to see you all out to support this great foundation. And I want to say thank you to Miss Kim Handy Jones for putting together this great. It's wonderful to see all of you, different colors, different creeds, different walks of life come together. We don't see that every day. And if we see more of this, we could get more things together. My name is Gwen Carr. I'm the mother of Eric Garner. You all heard the story of Eric Garner. He said, I can't breathe. 11 times he said, I can't breathe. But the disconcerted police officers, they decided to take his life. But I say, it is too late for my son. They killed him. There is no justice for him. But we must still stand for justice. We must get justice for those who come behind him. And in the future, when they hear the name Eric Garner, I want them to say, because of his death, that the ones who came behind him got justice. I want them to say that his death was not in vain. I want them to say that his mother stood up for him when she didn't even know what was going to happen to her. And at this point, it does not even matter, because you took my son. What else can you take from me? A lot of mothers, you don't even know, there's tens of thousands of us out here. Some of us were high profile, as they call it, but each case should be a high profile. One hurt is as bad as the next. Some of the mothers, they can't get out of bed. Some is on medication. Some is losing their mind. But I thank God that he let me keep my mind and let me get out here and let me advocate for my son as well as yours, and yours. Until the day I die, this is what I'm going to do. We know know that the system, they kill us twice. First, the police, they murder us in broad daylight. They murder us in the night where they don't think anyone is looking. Then they murder us in the newspaper. They bring out any little thing that they think that's going to criminalize us. But wait, what about those police officers who murdered our son? What about their records? That is never brought up unless we go. I had to go. We got it through the WikiLeaks, as we call it. A lot of stuff I found out there, because once I found out that you can get information through different sources, I was right there. So I just want to thank each and every one of you, each and every one of the mothers. I've met so many mothers around the nation who I have never met before, so many people who have supported me. And now that you support me, I support you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'd like to turn it over now to the commissioners for question period.
Ria, thank you very much. I want to ask Peter maybe to kickstart.
All right, Matt, thank you. Can I thank all the participants who I see and the other commissioners, and go straight into one thing that occurred to me. Jonathan, when you're dealing with an individual case, this appears to be not limited to a United States problem, but everywhere people of African descent live or work or try to survive, whether it be France, whether it be Australia, whether it be Brazil, the same form of brutality persists. And my question to you is it really possible to look at the court or the justice system in isolation without looking at the social status of African people not only in the diaspora, but as they are in the United States, to form a solution?
Well, I think you make a good point, because I think before you get to the solution, you have to understand what the problem is. And clearly, the issue of racial violence against people of African descent is not just isolated to this country or to any one country. It's a worldwide issue, and it has to be seen that way. And so if you're going to attempt to kind of come up with remedies or solutions to that issue, I think you have to address it on a more than just a one country basis. I think there are hopefully in the next few years we can strengthen some of the international mechanisms to try to deal with this. I think the problem, I think most people would say, is that where's the forum to raise these issues internationally, other than, of course, a forum like this, which I think is wonderful in terms of educating people. But where are the international forums where this can be raised and addressed in a meaningful way? So I agree with your premise. I think we have a lot of work to do to get to the point where we can, really have a meaningful multinational approach to this.
I think, Jonathan, just maybe to follow up on Peter's question, and possible one of the responses, and I would like to get your comment on that as Peter is saying, the Africans and the Black people everywhere else in the world come from a history of being non-human. That's the history of slavery, where people were part of the property. And you get to a place like the United States of America, where the entire political framework of the country is also based on lies. That here is a country that was founded by white tribes, and it had no people. So even today, anybody, therefore, that is not white is being seen as an outsider. And it's in that context that the police are dealing with both outsiders and, I dare say, non-human. To what extent should we not put that in the entire education system of the country? Because I think in as much as we're talking about police brutality, I think in other sectors of society, there's a similar discrimination against the people of color. Do you think the education is important in this regard? And what you call sensitivity training, shouldn't that be part of the law schools as well?
Well, you know, your what you say reminds me of, I think, the lesson that we all learned from the history of South Africa, which is before you can have accountability, you have to have truth. And the truth of what has what happened to the folks of African descent in this country is still not told in its fullest extent in our public education system. Is not taught in colleges and in universities and law schools. When you take a class on civil rights, you don't spend, you know, I teach a class in civil rights and I spend a lot of time talking about the underlying causes of why there are civil rights laws rather than just, this is the law, this is how you know, enforce it or whatever. There has to be some context. People have to understand the context in which people's lives have been ruined by a system of discrimination and racism. So I very much agree with you in acknowledging that there has to be a better job of talking about the truth. One of the things that we were able to do in the context of the stop and frisk litigation, and what we tried to do over the years in all these cases of racial violence, is not just talk about that incident, talk about it in the context of a series of incidents that begin to paint a more accurate picture of what life is like for people. And so I very much agree with you on that point.
Can I just ask one very quick question? Thank you very much, Max. If there was one reform that you think would deliver change tomorrow for people of African descent, at least in the United States, what would that be? What's that fundamental change? Name three if you like, but we're going to have to grapple with it as commissioners. We'd like your assistance.
Sure. I think that, I think you would, on a sort of a popular level, you would hear in the United States, people saying defund the police. I think that as a slogan that has a lot of power, I think in reality, it's not likely to lead to a meaningful reform because people obviously in every society see a need for some kind of law enforcement to order people's lives when it gets out of control. The problem is that the police have become an instrument of state control of mostly people of color and poor people as well. And so I think what we need to do is reimagine how the police perform their responsibilities. And one example I could give you is in terms of the way they deal with so-called people with emotional difficulties or mental health histories. There's no good reason why the police should be the first line of response when somebody's having a mental health crisis. You need people who are trained to deal with folks who are going through mental health crisis, not people who are simply trained to use force. And so I think that kind of change, I think is certainly on the horizon here in the United States. And I think people have a general understanding that makes sense. So I think we have to go back and we have to look at and rethink how the police should function in our society, and then build it up again in a way that one perhaps has a more limited role for the police compared to what they've been doing the last many years, and one that's more understanding and sympathetic to the real needs of people.
Jonathan, I just want to throw two possibilities. One, to what extent are the police themselves, when they are dealing with, in particular, the people of color that become their victims, is it itself an expression of trauma on their part? Because of the number of other things that they are facing. You know, the police are involved in all manner of terrible situations which might be traumatic.
Yeah.
And the tendency of the victims of trauma is to inflict pain to somebody that looks or weak or appears weaker. And in this instance, in the context of the United States in particular, the weaker people are the people of color. To what extent is that an expression of that? And how should we not use social workers, for instance, to be deployed, or psychologists to be deployed in every police station to be able to deal with that? So that's one. But the second one, which has been an experience in my own country, I mean, I've been a victim of police brutality so many times, to the extent that every time, even today, when I see a police van, the first reaction is to try and find the nearest place to hide. But one of the methods was to look at the civilian accountability.
Yeah.
Police station, to make sure that there's a community participation in terms of the assessment of crime in that particular area, in terms of the response and the reporting of the head of the police in that. So in a sense, the police don't see themselves as the enemies of the people,
Right.
but themselves as part of the community.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there in those questions, but it makes me think that the way to approach it is for me at this point, is to say, when you're imagining what a police department should look like, I think you have to do a number of things. One, there has to be true community involvement in how the police deploy one of their forces, how they direct the resources they have toward the community. It can't be just from the top down. It has to be the community interacting with the police department to say, this is a problem here. We think you should look at that and quit just, stopping every young black kid on the street on the way home from school. I think there has to be meaningful discipline within the police department. If you look at the Eric Garner case, that represents an absence, a total failure of the disciplinary process, in the sense that of the 5 or 6 officers who were involved in the conduct that led to Mr. Garner's death, 5 of them were not even brought up on disciplinary charges, and the one that was allowed to be in the police department for 5 years at full pay before he was actually terminated, and also, by the way, the state government and the federal government passed on bringing any kind of criminal prosecution against them. So you have an absolute failure of the disciplinary system, and part of the reason why it's a failure within police departments is that the community has no role in being involved in discipline. It's left up to the department. And any decision, they have all these civilian review boards and whatever, they come up with these recommendations, but it still goes back to the police department and the police commissioner, at least in New York, for decision. And that's where you have the problem, because that's where they say, well, I'm not going to, I don't want to be on the wrong side of the police unions. I'm going to, I'm not going to enforce the recommended discipline. And so you have, in many cases, where a civilian authority, they recommend discipline, the police department says no. That suggests also that one of the problems is that you have police unions who have gained too much power within in the context of how the police department functions. And I say this more from New York. I mean, New York City is a huge police department, over 35,000 sworn officers, and the police union has amazing power to both in terms of, you know, the contract provisions, and also just, you know, in terms of how they stir up the public against people who complain about police misconduct. So I think that has to be addressed. So discipline, I think there has to be community involvement. I think there has to be, you really have to check the power of the unions in a way. And I know that, you know, I'm sure there are many trade unionists who are part of these different organizations who are involved here. And I don't mean to I'm not trying to bash a union, but I do think that when the context of police community relations, police unions have way too much power and way too much sway over police departments. And I think that has to be looked at. So those are some of the suggestions I would offer as that might lead to some meaningful change. You have to, the problem is you have to change the culture of the police department, and that can't happen overnight. That can't happen with a training. If you're going to have training, it has to be recurring training. You can't just train an officer when they're in the academy and say, okay, you've been trained on how to deal with street encounters, or when you can use force and not use force. These are all, these things require constant training. And that's certainly another recommendation I would say, that the training has to be ongoing. When you give a one-day training on, you know, implicit bias in the policing, which may be interesting and meaningful, and you don't repeat it for the officers, that's the only time they go through it in their 25-year career, it becomes meaningless, you know? The same with training officers on how to deal with street encounters, you know? You know, if you don't constantly retrain and measure their training by giving them exams to see if they're, you know, if they pass it, you know, then you don't really, you have a training system that doesn't work. So.
Thanks. Peter?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to pick up on 2 points, and this is the external view of the United States from the rest of the world view, I suppose, is that you appear to have a highly militarized police force. And if you have a highly militarized police force, wherever that will be, Brazil or the United States, or even South Africa, the tendency is that human beings will use the maximum force that they have available to them. And therefore,
yeah. I'm sorry.
I don't think the police in France or Britain are any less racist, but what they cannot do, positional asphyxia is commonplace, and it's well known that it will kill. And therefore, I wondered to what extent the militarization of police forces in all of them, I think there's some 15,000. To what extent does that play a part in the police culture, do you think? And how can that be rectified?
Yeah.
Would you allow me to
Part
interrupt for a moment? I just need to call time at 45 minutes. There are 5 minutes remaining.
Okay. I think that the issue of the militarization of the police is I think you're right to point that out as a real issue in this country. I mean, you know, we invade a country and use all this military armor, and then when we leave, we bring it all back and give it to the police departments. That's a very simplified version of it, but there has been an overemphasis on armament and on the use of force and on you know, the militarization of police departments. And as you say, if you have these pepper guns and plastic bullets and whatever, you're going to use it. And so I agree with you that there really has to be a limit on that.
And
yeah,
maybe,
right.
Okay, Peter, go ahead.
No, I think it's
No, I was going to say what Peter has said. Maybe you can comment. You can comment on it, Jonathan. In actual fact, we had a situation here where we had what was called the police force, and it had to be deliberate in the philosophy of the new constitutional police service, that it must be regarded as police service rather than police force. And you drum that, as you are saying, on regular basis, that we are dealing with police service with responsibility is to serve the community rather than to mete out force. But secondly, we were very clear about the issue of law and order, and to say it's not really about law and order, but it's about safety and security, which has a different philosophical outlook. And when you start saying to these members, you are joining a police service whose responsibility is to ensure safety and security, and you begin to deal with that culture, what would be your comment on that?
Well, I think that is a real issue. I mean, I think the militarization of the police has gone on basically unchecked for too many years. I think it's tied to the issue of discipline, though, because for me it is on a very practical level, because if you have ultimate decisions on discipline being made by the police themselves or by the top law enforcement officer in the police department, the commissioner or whatever, then you really have no meaningful discipline. You can only have a disciplinary system that has some kind of community control or community involvement in it. Because, you know, as they use the term in the United States is that, you know, the blue wall of silence. Officers protect each other. They don't come forward. One of the most recent developments that are being talked about in the U.S. Is the issue of trying to encourage officers to come forward to discourage other officers from from violating people's rights. It's called ethical policing. It's something that's catching on in a lot of different police departments, and it's a way of saying, we're talking about an early intervention system. It's because you're right there in the incident, and you have officers who are trained to say to another officer, don't do this because you may lose your job, and I may lose my job because I'm allowing you to do it. And if I see something happen and I don't intervene, I could lose my job as well. And so that's a specific remedy that a lot of people have been talking about as a good development. I wish there was more time to go through all the different specifics, but those are some of them I think that could lead to more meaningful police reform. But you know, the reality is both of you have said, is that how we police in this country is a reflection of our history and our view of people, which in this country is we have a horrible history of racism, and beginning with slavery and then with Jim Crow and now with the rise of white supremacy. It's no mistake. It's no coincidence that a number of those folks who assaulted the Capitol building on January 6th a couple of weeks ago were former military and law enforcement officers, or even current law enforcement officers. That's not surprising to us, those of us who have been working in this area for many years. So.
Just the last question on my part, Jonathan. To what extent, or what will be the proportion of a similar violence against white civilians as compared to the people of color? So do we mean that there is not similar violence that is meted out to the white civilians?
Yeah, the best example I can give you of that is again the stop and frisk case, which is in the stop and frisk case, of the 4 million people who were stopped in the period we were looking at, 90% were Black or Hispanic, and 90% of the cases, it led to no further police activity, no charges brought, no anything. Yet, even though Blacks were stopped at a higher rate than whites, the incidence of contraband found on whites was a higher percentage than on Blacks. So, if you're really if you're looking at the system honestly, you would say, why are you focusing on people of color if there's a higher incidence of guns found on white people who are stopped compared to Black? Or the other unfortunate example is that the incidence of violence against people stopped was higher for people of color than for folks who are white. So, and really any way that you look at it, and almost any way that you look at it, you see that the fundamental problem here is our history and our history of racism in this country anyway, which is, it always comes back to that in my judgment. And until we begin to understand that truth, we can never move beyond what we have now to a true system of accountability.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. This concludes the hearing in the case of Eric Garner. We'll now have a short break. Hearings will resume on the hour with the case of Freddie Gray.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Ria.
You're welcome.
Ria, you said it's gonna be the break.
Very much.
Pardon me?